Let me turn it over and identify the panels which we have here, which have come a pretty broad cross-section. We have people that are involved on the media agency side, people that are content agencies, some that are involved in the data analytical side to help these organizations help their brands make decisions on what to do. Also on the game side as well as networks, branded entertainment network for one. So let me introduce. I'm going to start with my immediate right. Your left is Ty Jones, who is Senior Director of Celebrity Talent at Who Say. Next to Ty is Josh Brooks, who's Senior Vice President for Brand Strategy and Marketing at Jam City. It's in the video game space. Next to Josh is Darnell Briscoe, who is Vice President for Accounts at Fullscreen. Next to Darnell is Will Park, and Will is Director of Brand Integrations at BEN, which is the Branded Entertainment Network that I alluded to a few moments ago. Then we have Ben Tata, who is co-founder and president of 605, and Ben will tell you what 605 is, but that's the company that's in the data space and the analytical space. Last but not least is Anathea Rees, who's managing director of Cara.
You can say it with a little French inflection, if that would help.
That's okay. I had founded a company which is in San Diego called Verance. Actually, it's Verance, which is an audio watermark technology company, but people would say Verance with a little French accent. But so Cara, L.A. So we're going to go back to you, Anathea. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what Cara is doing in the space, what your role is, and any thoughts that you have generally.
So Cara is a media planning and buying organisation at its heart, and importantly, content is I would argue, is probably most closely aligned with what we do in media planning agencies, because content is a way to reach people. We've had lots of conversations prior to this, sitting out the back there, about the roles of channels, and I think media agencies play a really important role in helping to identify how you use different channels and what goes into those channels to work together. Content is a way of engaging with people. You can use other forms to build broad brand awareness, to drive an action, and I think from our perspective it's really important that we understand what they're doing and how they're working together. And I don't think anyone on this panel would disagree that content doesn't work in and of itself. Television advertising doesn't work in and of itself. Social doesn't work in and of itself. It's how they all work together and play the different roles that really makes it a powerful way to reach people. And my background, interestingly, has always been swinging between the content and the media agency space, because they are so inextricably linked that I think it makes sense for people, for talent to move from one to the other.
Thank you, Anathea.
Hi, so I'm Ben Tata, president and co-founder of 605. For those that don't know about 605, don't feel bad. We're a relatively new company that was founded in November of last year. And our focus is really on measurement and analytics to kind of solve the measurement problems that exist in TV. TV historically has been measured by what is really a large focus group. It's thousands of households that are modeled out to project to 120 million households. Our approach is different. We use more of a digital-oriented approach where we're aggregating set-top box data at a device level, roll that up to the household so that we can provide more granular measurements. So whether that's measuring, the exposure and the conversion off of spots as measured at a household level, or whether that's measuring exposure with branded entertainment or product placement. It can be anything during a show or during the adjacent ad breaks. And I think that's what's interesting, is there's so much investment kind of trying to optimize television, and I think one of the biggest challenges, the fundamental measurement system is broken, with all of the fragmentation. So our aim is really to solve for that by onboarding tens of millions of households of set-top box data on a second-by-second level and be able to match that against other attributes.
Thanks. Before we move down, though, I just wanted to ask you, when you're doing that, are you also then considering how that data can be used in terms of creating new programming or new, branded entertainment sort of experiences?
It's a great question. It's a great question, just because even though there's a lot of focus on ad attribution and optimizing advertising, so much of the benefit is using it for just curating better programming by being able to move beyond just age and gender. The other challenge with the current measurement system is that everything is reflected by age and gender only. And knowing what we've learned with digital, marketers and programmers really need to understand audiences based on their level of loyalty, their viewing behavior, and viewing characteristics at a household level. So that's a big part of what we are focused on, is actually using the data to help curate better programming. So whether it's the development of that programming, or whether it's the distribution or marketing of that programming, having deeper, richer data to work with should benefit, all sides of the equation.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
Yes,
Will.
hi. Will Park. I'm from the Branded Entertainment Network. We are a Bill Gates-owned company, and what we do is really kind of connect global brands with content and storytellers to find organic meanings, and it could be across all verticals, whether it be feature film, television, digital influencers, and we really try to build campaigns and strategic approaches for brands that some of them have been with us for decades, to kind of build a strategic approach to be a part of the story across not just the biggest films or the biggest digital influencers, but kind of create a narrative thread through story and building relationship with storytellers and kind of build a meaningful way for, again, a brand to not just be around a piece of content, but actually in it. We have a rich heritage in product placement. We used to be an agency called Norm Marshall & Associates, which dates back to the late 70s. Norm Marshall was a pioneer in the product placement space. And Bill Gates saw the value in that, and he wanted to bring data and analytics behind it, and saw that the shift of advertising was changing. So he really took an interest in this area, so he acquired us, and we've been doing some great things ever since.
Well, I know Bill Gates isn't quite as active at Microsoft anymore, but if you look at the Microsoft Surface on all the NFL sidelines,
Yeah.
and how he's used that as a way to help market and promote that product. Not he, but Microsoft's used that as a way to promote that product. I think has been pretty significant. They also used to use that a lot, thinking again at football, with the headsets that they used. I remember for a while it was Telex, and they go through different, well, whoever wants to pay the bills, I suppose, different brands to do that. But that's another area where live sports has built in an interesting way. Darnell, tell us how Fullscreen is.
I'm Darnell Briscoe. I'm a vice president of accounts at Fullscreen. Fullscreen's primary business is in the influencer space, a multi-channel network, a talent agency of sorts for over 85,000 creators across YouTube and other platforms. But specifically, I lead the entertainment group on our social agency, most recently known as McBeard. We were acquired by them about 2 years ago, and I lead our entertainment group across social. For social, we really have a kind of a full suite, full capability suites of social services, and over the last 10 years have done over 400 television and movie social campaigns, including the most recent Star Wars campaign, Deadpool, and the two most social shows for the past 2 years, Saturday Night Live and Pretty Little Liars.
That sounds like it's been keeping you pretty busy. Josh, Jam City.
Jam City. My name is Josh Brooks. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing Strategy for Jam City. It's a gaming studio, probably one of the largest small game studios you can probably think about these days. 500 employees, over 850 million downloads of our games. 7 years old, and the idea that these mobile games that are becoming more than just a 13-year-old downstairs playing any variety of console games is not the reality anymore. We've got a huge audience. It's a $45 billion a year business. So Jam City is the leader of that. We've got about 12 live titles today. And when I mean live titles, I mean everything from the Family Guy game to Cookie Jam to Panda Pop to Futurama, and at the end of the day, these games are business as a service, or games as a service, and they're continuing to grow year after year. Interestingly enough, when I look at the panel today, I find myself spending money with an agency for advertising, coming up with an interesting analytics and data solution so I understand how my money is working, between the two of you guys coming up with interesting narrative and concepts that we can share by way of social or by way of other means. And of course, oftentimes if we're doing titles, we're going to spend money with celebrities. So we're smack in the middle of all of this. Games is a monster business, and personally my background is always been in social, always been in consumer, and I spent 6 years managing bands, so I get the dark side of the business as well.
There's a dark side of the business.
There is.
So Ty, who came up with the name Husei?
Our CEO did, and yeah, there was some debate when it first started, but yeah, we just went with it. Google still sounds okay, so it's all right.
Yeah?
Yeah, take it.
Tell us, well, I guess Josh sort of gave you a little intro about the celebrity side, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so again, my name's Ty Jones. I'm the Senior Director of Talent for Husei. We are an influencer marketing company. When we first started out in 2010, we were in the entertainment space with celebrities, helping them launch onto social for the first time, helping them with brand and digital strategy, and just figuring out a way to create some sort of value in that space with all the pressures of promoting their projects, books, film, TV, all that fun stuff. Either their publicists yelling at them to be on social, or even just the film or studio yelling at them to help promote. Our backers when we started out were Amazon, Greylock Partners, and creative artist agencies, so that helped us get into that space and know the right people to create an actual app that celebrities could use to post content to all their socials, retain some sort of ownership rights back when you could do that a little bit with your content. And that's kind of how we got our space as a trusted name, with that celebrity talent. In the last few years, we've shifted more into the influencer marketing space. So what we do is we'll put together branded campaigns, with agencies and brands. We try to be turnkey as possible for them. They come to us for casting of the talent, both using data that we've acquired over the last 7-8 years to hopefully find the right people that match well with the brand, both the audience base and also the right voice that celebrity has. Make sure that they're professional to work with and the right people to work with. They're going to show up on set, get the content done. We'll also take care of all the production, filming, editing, all that fun stuff. And we'll also take care of the media distribution, a lot of that paid media, because at the end of the day, we're on the hook, for impressions with the brand. So we try to do all that in one stop, and we take every single step of that very, very seriously. We're commercial grade, everything that we do, and hopefully the product shows.
That's really very interesting. A couple questions for you, though, is which campaigns, when you've matched up a celebrity, which ones have been real wins, and I'm not looking also for those that have been big losses, but which ones didn't meet your expectations?
Yeah, one of our early ones when we first got into the space, we were predominantly known as working with A-list talent or more established, actors that you would see on, film and TV, or also musicians. But we also, span it. If the brand is looking for influencers, very niche people, if you're looking for petfluencers or, people that have beards that really can talk about, hair care for your face, we'll find those people hopefully. But one of our early campaigns did involve A-listers, and we were actually surprised how easily we could but how well we could put something together with people that weren't used to, dipping their toes in this branded space, especially in digital. We did a campaign with Chevy for their best day ever, and we actually got 5 celebrities across the country to surprise classrooms all within one morning. So we're capturing content in the classrooms, we're doing B-roll, around campus, all that kind of stuff. We had people like Norman Reedus from Walking Dead, we had Olivia Wilde, we had Ian Somerhalder. I was out here with Alec Baldwin, who wanted to dress up as Abe Lincoln to surprise a history class at Occidental College, so that's what we filmed. And one of the great things about what we do at Husei is that we're we want to be, very heavily involved with that talent and hopefully, get as much out of them in an organic way, so their fingerprints are all over the content, so it feels better for them. So we'll talk to both the reps and the talent as much as possible when creating the treatments for these creative campaigns. So with Alec, he brought up the idea, I want to be Abe Lincoln. So we're like, all right, we'll go with it, and ended up being a really fun campaign and a good reveal and just, good content at the end of the day.
How about one that might not have met your expectations?
We've had a few where we've learned over the past two. When I mentioned earlier, we take every step of this seriously. We will put full production behind everything. So even if you're at a red carpet, or if you're just at home taking a selfie-style type video to post out, we're going to have someone there from our creative team, from production. We're making sure that we get everything right, making sure that we get the brand talking points correct as well, just so it looks good. So we've had some in the past where we'll show up to an actor's house and they're not camera ready. There's no lighting. There's a lot of that stuff we're just shooting on an iPhone 5. Which is just brutal. So we've had a lot of that in the past where we've learned from it. So I think, when we create that really, really good content and then also smartly distribute it, that's going to be a win. But it really does start with that talent and that content with the creative.
So I have a question for all of you. We talked about how we have a plethora of new platforms out there, as well as all these program services. Let's stay first on ad-supported television. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. There's still a place for that, and where do you see that going?
From a media agency perspective, actually no, from an audience perspective, there's still an enormous place for television. Television is one of the main ways people consume content. That might be changing, but it hasn't gone away. The idea that television's dying is laughable. Most of our clients still invest most of their money in television because it is one of the best ways to get really broad reach, and reach is an incredibly important thing to achieve. I think that what we need to be talking about is not what channel is dying and what's taking over the world and how things are changing fundamentally, but more how do we use these channels and how do we use them together to achieve more than one can achieve in its own. So television now plays a really important role. It's always played a really important role in reach, but now because we've got the ability to support what's happening on the screen with social, with second screening, and the way people's behaviour has changed, we're able to make whatever is on television so much more powerful. And you can use advertising and support that with content to make it richer. The 30-second ad is still a really important way of reaching people. That's not what we're describing as branded content, branded entertainment, because that is the disruption to the entertainment. But when we can support that disruption with different forms of entertainment, whether it's through an influencer campaign, whether it's through a social campaign, whether it's through a game that you are alluding to in your ad, we make things so much stronger. And I feel that this us and them approach to channels doesn't serve any of us particularly well, and I think we are so much stronger when we are thinking about the audience first rather than the channel that they'll be reached through.
Other people's views?
I would agree with that. I don't think TV is dying in any way. I think it's just taking a different form. I think there's a lot of different avenues that a storyteller can produce their content. I think that it's not an or situation, I think it's an and situation. I think if a brand takes a holistic and campaign approach, they can reach their audience in different ways. I think there's a difference between reach and engagement. I think, I think it also depends on where you live in the country. I think there's different viewing habits if you live on the coasts or if you're in middle America. We live in Los Angeles. I think we live in a very, people view content differently here than, let's say, another state, and I think that puts into consideration. And I think there's an incredible value to network television, and I think brands believe that as well. But if you're able to build a relationship with a young emerging filmmaker or a content creator that's maybe producing their content in a new platform, those viewers may be more engaged, and you might be able to speak to a more specific audience. So I think, again, I think it's an and situation. I think it's an opportunity for brands to reach their audience in different ways, and in a more engaged way as well.
For us, we're in the games business, and I see TV, whether it be traditional TV or online TV, as the, we would be the connective tissue. The games are going to be the connective tissue for that piece of IP. So if you're watching a Family Guy show and it's on season 12, even though it's on season 16 now, I would hope that our game is a connective tissue to that ongoing series. And so more importantly, if I'm going to think about who my target audience is and who my acquisitions or potential acquisitions are, I think that's a pretty good spot. Will I spend money on TV media to find new users if they're already pre-qualified because they're huge fans of Family Guy? And I think the short answer is yes. And if we're smart about it, we can figure out good attribution to say, yes, it may be a high CPI, but it's actually yields something pretty well because we can measure how well these installs work for us. That's a pretty qualified audience, pretty focused audience, and we already know, in theory, part of them are cord cutters in theory. So what we can do is say, great, our game applies to that same audience who is not necessarily connected in the same way DirecTV or Comcast used to be. They're watching it on Hulu.
So, moving beyond that, in the past, when you only had a few number of stations out there or program outlets, it was easier to sort of assure that you're going to get a certain number of eyeballs to make it worthwhile. Now, when you have Hulu and Amazon and Netflix announced spending around $13.5 billion in programming this year, coupled with the roughly $12 million that the networks, $12 billion in both cases, if I said million, I meant billion, with so much programming out there, what challenges is that? Are those challenges, are those opportunities, are they both? How do you deal with finding the right programs for brands and then trying to assure that you're going to get people to watch those?
Well, I think the thing that's never changed is that people are complex. They had fewer options before, but it didn't change how complex they were, or their interests, or likes, or affinities. And I think the explosion of content creation is just a manifestation of that realization that there are audiences who are interested in different things or versions of things, and a variety of things. And so if you can be smarter about understanding where those audiences are and why they're interested in those things, and then creating branded content or ads or whatever messages you're trying to get in front of them, and you can target those to those audiences, then that's a win for everyone, because at the end of the day, all of those people are more qualified and more interested to actually engage with the thing that and be more receptive to the messages that you want them to hear.
We're so lucky, aren't we, all of us and anyone that works in this industry, because just as you were talking, Danielle, I was really realising that it's never been better, because on the one hand, you've got these big properties that everybody's watching, that become sort of cultural moments, and everybody's watching The Handmaid's Tale, and what does that mean for the world we live in, and everyone's watching This Is Us. But on the other hand, you have more content that is more directly aligned with the weird and wacky individual passion points of people who like watching cats bat doors open or fist pump, and you can get the content that you want. We're lucky as marketers, and the audience is lucky as people who can always find content that's going to really drive them, whether it's cultural big moments or individual passions. And I think that for brands, the ability to take advantage of that in the different ways we can, whether that's integrating into properties, whether that's facilitating the access to that content for people, we've got this great opportunity. What it takes is the ability to think really broadly about what your audience is looking for, and using the access to data that we have now to really start to hone in and create audience segments that are we're calling it a segment of one. What can you do to reach a person on an individual basis that's going to really motivate them? It could not be more exciting. Thanks, Darnell. You've given me a pep.
I'd agree. I think it's driving consumption up, but it's also driving fragmentation. So the key is just being able to measure and draw a direct correlation. I think TV's Achilles heel has been measurement. It's based on a small sample, so you really can't match that against the digital data to really get a granular sense of how target audiences are consuming, especially if the definition of that audience is based on age and gender. In the example earlier, Family Guy, that's the Family Guy viewer, and the loyalist is really the target audience, not men 18 to 24. So being able to track that audience across the dial and across platform, I think, is really the key. And then just being able to match up the cross-platform data, so you can do things like unduplicated reach and really get a sense of what your true unique household reach is on a campaign basis. But I would say with the opportunity is a growth in consumption and this kind of explosion of content, the challenge would be, the underlying measurement.
I also think it's a great opportunity for brands to be more proactive rather than reactive with so much content out there. I think, you look at a show like Stranger Things and it's become a huge success, but if you were to pitch that show when nobody knew what it was, I don't think you could get a lot of brands to jump on board there. But if you get brands now, everybody wants to be in the show. So I think it's an opportunity for a brand to take chances, take risks, and identify quality programming, quality content, and quality storytellers, and really be a part of it from the beginning. And I think, what we do at Ben is we constantly have a finger on the pulse of content and the production community and know kind of the hot properties that are coming out, but it's overwhelming for a brand or even an audience with so much content out there, because I could probably look out into this room and you guys probably aren't up to date on all the hottest shows just because there's so many of them. So I think it's an opportunity to really to navigate through it and really kind of build relationships with shows as they start rather than when they're already big.
Yeah, and the beauty with the tools available now is that being iterative is so much easier. You can take the same 20-second piece and have 4 seconds different in 20 different versions, and then test that to small groups, see how they're reacting, why they're reacting, what their reactions are, and use that information to continue to be iterative. And then when you find something that works for certain groups, when you're finding things that give you a bit more of conclusive evidence, then you can spend a lot of money behind them. You can push them out in wider and broader ways, and really then get the best bang for your buck in an effective way.
So let's go back to basics a little bit about what draws brands to certain programs that they want to be in. And also in terms of, are they looking at it as just being, certainly if it's a motion picture, it's another story because it's a single film, although obviously you have sequels and so forth. But on television, do you look for just that one shot for brand placement or integration, or are you trying to have a continuing relationship? How does that sort of evolve in discussions with the content owners and?
I think it's obviously case by case for every category, but I think the goal is to really build an alliance with the character. I think it really starts with the character. If the character speaks to the same values and goals that the brand has, that's paramount. It's not just about who is playing that part or how big the show is. It's what's the message of the show, what's this character's personality and ideologies, and does it match with the brand? And obviously, if you can build that narrative thread throughout the series and align that brand with the character, I think that's the dream. I think that's the goal. Whether it be the favorite drink that the character has or the car that they always kind of go to, because it makes that character now relatable to the audience. And I think when we're watching shows and we're watching our characters, we almost kind of want to see a part of ourselves in them, or somehow to become emotionally connected to them. And I think that's what brands are able to do is give a snapshot of this is a world that exists and it doesn't look that different than mine, so I can buy into it. And I think it's more jarring when it's a fictional brand or it's a Greeked out brand, because it immediately takes you out of the story and you realize that world's not real. So I think from a brand's perspective, to answer your question, I think it really kind of starts with the character.
Have there been any instances where a character has started in one direction on a show, but then took some turns with the change, in the script writing, et cetera, that has sort of created more of a negative element to that individual than the brand might have wanted?
Yeah. I mean, that happens all the time, and I think that's something that we educate our brands on from the very beginning, because the creative process is not a black and white thing. A script is a living, breathing thing. Things happen on the day of shooting that an actor might want to hold something differently or say something differently. But yeah, we put guardrails in place to make sure that the brand is protected, of course, because that's our paramount goal. But you have to leave some flexibility for the creative storytellers to tell their story in the way that they need to tell their story, because there's a reason why you want to be in the show. And so you have to kind of go in there knowing that you have to give them the freedom to tell the story that they need to tell.
Right. So if they have the freedom to tell the story they want to tell, then you don't try to even have subconsciously them thinking, well, gee, I have to stay within these contours because they're helping support the funding of the program?
Yeah, again, it's kind of a case-by-case basis, and it's a delicate line that we walk every day because we have to make both sides happy. Again, protecting the brand, making sure that the brand is represented correctly, but also being respectful of the storyteller. So, yeah.
I think this is one of the biggest challenges with branded content or branded entertainment is how brands are able to let go of their brand once it goes into this space. It doesn't matter if it's a television show or a film or working with influencers or any other form of content. You can't own your brand throughout it. Once you are no longer advertising, you need to let go some control. I've worked with so many clients over the years who are always saying you must use these words around the product. It's like that doesn't even sound real. Mm-hmm. Modelling compound is not a word any mum or dad or child uses. It's not. And so to try and put those restrictions ends up creating content that is fake and inauthentic and not enjoyable and stands out, because we all know what it's like as people to watch something where they're positioning the bottle just perfectly so you can see the label. It doesn't feel real. And when brands do this best, they are brave, they step back and they allow the content to reach the consumer, and they have worked hard enough in the background that the brand is inextricably part of it. And I think the guys at Marriott do a really powerful job of this. And one of my favourite stories was when the then CMO of Marriott, it was the first the Two Bellboys film. They're now up to number 3. But in the first one, they brought the first cut to the CMO and he said, get rid of all of those, here is your key, Mr. Jeter, and the close-up on the logo on the key. He said, that's not part of the content. If that's how we're trying to get our brand across, this is not going to be good content. So they scrapped all of that and just made it authentically in a hotel and brought the experience to life in that way. So I think it's hard to do, and if as brands you can't do this, if you cannot give up some of that control, then don't play in this space. Do it in a space where you have the ability to control it more.
Yeah.
How has binge viewing impacted what you do and what
It's made me very
considerations
tired
you
in the
have?
morning sometimes.
I'm sorry? I missed that.
It's made me very tired in the morning.
Well, I was thinking more on the professional side as opposed to the personal side. But because I know, Will, what some of the answers you gave me talked about how actually, binge watching can be quite a positive.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a dedicated research and insights team that's doing incredible studies, and you're seeing that the brand recall for binge behavior is insignificant. If you're watching 4 episodes of something in a 4-hour block, it's gonna leave an impact for you, and it ultimately leads to purchase intent, which is ultimately what the brand is looking for. Of course, if it's in an organic way, but I think binge behavior and viewership in general has really created an incredible opportunity for brands.
But has it provided a lasting impact versus during that week that you did the binge watching?
I believe it has. Again, if you're just placing a product just to place a product, but if you're really creating a moment with a character that really kind of resonates with an audience,
Right.
I think it does absolutely last.
If we could all have a lot of Reese's Pieces moments,
Yeah, exactly.
those would
I
be
think
big
the one,
successes.
the interesting dynamic within the pay TV space is nothing has really driven more VOD consumption than Netflix. So here, you have this platform that theoretically is, really stealing audiences from TV, but it's really just introducing a new behavior. And in the past, programmers didn't really have a way of measuring loyalty to programming. Yeah, they get a rating, but they don't know what percentage of that rating is, and that audience is there episode after episode. Whereas with the VOD stats or the nonlinear viewing information, they get a real good sense of what that continued consumption is and what's the size of that audience that's consuming, almost 100% of everything you're putting out versus kind of light, casual munching on an episode or more periodic basis. And then from an advertising perspective, the amount of engagement, that happens with, binge viewing is huge. People aren't, interrupting their viewing, even though they can stop and pause and so forth. they're burning through multiple episodes. So if you think of just the session length, the amount of time, that a viewer is investing in your content, it's significant. And I think as long as the advertisers are thoughtful in how they deliver ads in that environment, because I don't know if you've seen this, but the one downside to VOD is in cases where they aren't dynamically inserting ad, you'll see the same ad, at every ad break. So that, to me is, one of the issues that has to get solved, which it is. Over time that will change. And then also just getting more thoughtful of what are the right points to insert an ad, and what's the, don't stick with the normal pod structure, the 2 minutes an hour of local or 6 minutes of national can be changed. You don't need to stick with that same ad load. And a lot of programmers are experimenting with kind of different ad loads and different forms of advertising in kind of a binge mode, and I think that's really wise.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to know your audience and know their user behavior and know the norms. I'm super surprised that no one has taken that thing that people hate about Hulu. You see the same ad like 20 times during the course, and made a commercial that has too much to see in the first one, so you have to watch it over and over and over again, so you're picking things out. Based off of, here's what I know about the audience, here's what I know about their experience, and then here's a way that I'll use that to my advantage. And so really, you talked about Snapchat earlier, about the way same piece of content doesn't work on Snapchat versus Instagram stories, even though those two things seem similar. It doesn't work on Facebook, doesn't work on Hulu. And so it's really about understanding the platforms and the user behavior and the best way to take advantage of them.
Yeah, I would also say that the binge audience has now created this like super fan or the super viewer who is now craving more.
Yeah.
And they're craving more, whether it's merchandise, they're waiting for it, a total nerd blog to give in all the deep insights that they maybe didn't totally understand. But you've now created a more invested viewer or partner in your viewing session. And it's wide open for everybody to kind of go after those businesses that are ancillary. And if we call, selfishly a game an ancillary business to a TV show, fantastic. If it's a merchandise line, if it's anything else, it's just yet another sort of place that necessarily wasn't necessarily there before, or organized in a way that it is today digitally.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, you can tell a much more complex message, I think, now because of the binge nature. In the same way that they do with storylines, you maybe would have to have some type of recall, some type of really cheesy line to remind you that last week you saw this store owner and he had this part to play in the narrative. But if you're in a binge model, you can dive deep, but then not have that reminder. You can take it another step further and another step deeper. And in the same way, in the relationships that you build with the products and the way that they interact with the characters, there's a really unique opportunity there.
Yeah, and getting back to your point too, Josh, about the binge behavior of consumers. Look what happens with this past weekend with Rick and Morty fans and McDonald's. You see something like that where Rick and Morty's become very popular, especially with binging on Hulu and all that good stuff. And there's been a huge online community surrounding that. There's one throwaway joke in one, the season 1 episode this season, or the episode 1 this season, and it was about Szechuan sauce that was around during Mulan in '97 or something like that. And McDonald's really tried to catch that fire because there was a lot of pickup of people wanting that sauce, bring it back, McDonald's, all of that. They tried to do it this past, I think, Saturday, and it actually got a lot of backlash with fans showing up. There wasn't enough sauce, people freaked out, and so it did create conversation, obviously, but it created a lot of negative behind it too, half-assing it, trying to get that done. But again, they were trying to catch that wave of that online voice, of that binge viewer, of that invested fan that they didn't know they had.
Was that an unintended pun about catching fire with Szechuan sauce?
Maybe. I haven't had it. I don't know if it's spicy or not.
Oh, okay. Typically they are, though.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the data side a little bit, Ben. You talked about your access to data for the analysis. How do you establish those relationships? Are they relationships where, because I know in some of the things we talked about, the first-party data, which is different than the second-party. Maybe you could give us a little more of a handle on the types of data, how you get them. Are they, and you did identify that some come from the sources themselves, the programming networks or cable operators, you get set-top box data, but what challenges do you have in getting data?
Well, that's been the biggest issue, is that there hasn't been a lot of data available in the TV space. In the last few years, a lot of the cable operators and distributors of content have made that data available. So that's our primary source, is working. We announced a deal with Charter where we're onboarding, all of their data. And our goal is to get to as near census as possible and then make the data matchable. I think the other issue is there's third-party data that's available that might have certain audience attributes appended to it, like canned app attributes or off-the-shelf attributes, households in market for a car. Well, BMW may want to study households that currently own a BMW. So that data has to be matchable to other data sets. And so our focus is, in every case where we're licensing data, every record is matchable, and in the pay TV space, it's authenticated, meaning someone has to pay a bill to get access to the service. So this notion of fraud is minimized, but more importantly, you have a common household identifier that other data can be matched to. So a lot of it is looking at conversion data, sales data, and whether it's a brand like, we work with Uber and Walmart, and a lot of that is just really matching up ad exposure data to conversion, to sales data, to see what audiences are delivering and then how that conversion is happening. And it's not, the nice thing about TV is that it can address all layers of the funnel. So looking at kind of the customer journey from brand exposure to sale, there could be a lot of latency in between that period. So it's not like a direct response model where we're looking at just what happens, within minutes of the ad exposure. But because everything's time-stamped, we can correlate those records. And getting back to the point earlier, we talk a lot about frequency on TV, but so much of it is about sequence, the sequence of the messaging. And with binge viewing, you have the ability of knowing episode 2 is going to come after episode 1 without a doubt, and being able to tell the story in chapters, is another opportunity that when you have the right household level data, you can rethink the way that you're actually delivering ads, and then be thoughtful about digital or social, being able to attach kind of an extended effect to those impressions. So from a data perspective, a lot of it is for us is just onboarding as much device level data as we can, making sure that everything is nimble enough to match against other records. For the programmers who are distributing across a number of channels, for them the real value is being able to understand consumption across all those platforms at a unique household level. And so we do a lot of kind of pulling together all the different feeds of data that are available so that we can do like share of viewing and looking at the behavior of those that may consume both platforms a lot, but maybe it's a day part thing. There's certain day parts where they're really tapping into OTT, versus linear. And I think that the connective tissue of that is really, I think, what's going to move a lot of this forward. And for the folks here that do a lot of work on the branded entertainment space, being able to measure the effect of like a product placement within a show down, at a timestamp level, like here are household impressions at that specific time that responded to that product placement. Being able to correlate that, I think, is an opportunity that exists today that didn't, even a year or two ago.
So I want to drill down a little bit further, though, because you talked about Charter, and I know you're doing some special work with them. But would you have access to their data but for the fact that you're also providing information back to them and services? I mean, for example, can you get Comcast data? Can you get Verizon Fios data just out there on the market?
We, a lot of the work that we've done to date has been with addressable advertising, and with addressable, it's in 40 plus million households. It's across 4 of the top MVPDs. We do get really granular ad exposure data that we can match. That doesn't give us access to the linear kind of second by second viewing. So I think the two work in tandem. While we are working with addressable, we also want to scale our base of second by second data, and that's where more strategic relationships come into play. Like with Charter, it is a strategic partnership. We're providing a lot of services back just in onboarding and normalizing the data so it's of a measurement quality, and then also providing analytics services back. So to answer your question, each relationship is a little different, but most of them do take on, greater life than just, hey, I'll pay you X amount for your data, just because in most cases, they're very protective, and rightly so.
Okay, usually we hold questions to the end, but we have a half hour, and some of the other panels I've been going to, there's been a lot of really good questions earlier, so I thought I'd open it up. If people have questions they'd like to ask now, and please identify who you are. And we'll start with this young lady here. And I'm going to repeat the questions too, or I'm going to try to, because it's going to be webcast and we've been asked to do that.
Kim Owens with Caffeine Buzz. So I am a content marketer, but I also am a journalist and write and cover branded content, entertainment, and technology in the direction that everything is going. One of the things I want to bring up is the brand safety issue, and the brands kind of pushing against advertising. But what happens when the brand like Dove comes out with something that they either created internally or through an agency, and talking about diversity and inclusion in your creative team to ensure that things like this don't keep happening, because they're obviously not the only one who has made this mistake, and the first thing you think of is this had to go through a lot of different people to get to the point where it got to the public. So what are your thoughts on diversity and inclusion in creative teams and concepting these things and putting them together before they get out to the public and having that filter?
So I'm going to try to distill that question a little bit. And it's an excellent, I think it's an excellent question. I'm sure you will too. But the question really deals with brand safety. One of the examples was Dove with their campaign, which I guess had women of different shapes and sizes and colors and what have you. And how diversity and inclusion get into there, what considerations are made in the process to try to have positive representations and hopefully not get negative feedback about them.
Can I start with that one? Because I read a couple of articles about that this morning. I presume you're talking about the one where she's taking the T-shirt off, the flesh-coloured T-shirts. I read two really interesting articles on that this morning. The message, the ad itself, was very different to the screenshot that has caused the concern. This is what I read this morning. It's a series of three women, and they take off flesh-coloured tops, and they it turns into a different woman. It's not suggesting one woman becomes the second woman or becomes the third woman. We never saw the third woman in the screenshots that have caused a lot of the tension and concern. One of the articles was actually written by the first woman in the ad, and she said, this is not what it was all about at all. In fact, it was all about diversity and inclusion and right products for right people, and I think this is a really interesting example of how things can be taken out of context and go completely viral, to use that terrible word, when people respond to headlines rather than actually going into the story itself. It doesn't mean it's any less of an issue for Dove. It's obviously really rebounded on them, but it was a vastly different story that they would, or message that they were trying to get out there than what was taken. And I think part of the issue is how people on social media do tend to respond to the headline rather than delving behind it. It's fascinating.
And at that point, we're also suckers for clicking on that. And then the more it becomes clicked on,
outraged.
the higher it becomes as a search. And now we've created our own monster. So unfortunately, we should sort of blame ourselves if we decided to do a cheap shot on what was supposed to be an intended ad that had one thing and someone just out of context took it. It's unfortunate. Yeah, I don't know if you can prepare for that, to be honest. Think about it. How would you prepare? You can do focus groups at the wazoo, and what are you going to do? You're going to focus group and figure out if somebody says, what happens if we stop frame here and it looks like an odd photo? How is that preventable? That's really challenging. That's different. Sorry, that's different than
forward, though.
Yeah, but that's different than the Pepsi one with
Kendall Jenner.
Jenner. I mean, that is borderline just mindless.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, though, the immediacy of the response and how social, beyond even the value of a focus group, how social can be used to really get an immediate reaction. Clearly, it has to be filtered so that, you can really make some sense out of it. But, the fact that they got an immediate reaction, I'm guessing they are going to be approaching things differently based on that reaction alone. I know in cases where we've measured the effectiveness of 2 different pieces of creative, it's interesting. Like there was one multicultural campaign where they were targeting Hispanics and African American households, and when we for the control group, we just switched the spots, and it turned out among younger African American households, the Hispanic spot was more appealing, more engaging. The engagement time was much longer, which kind of threw a wrench into the whole, creative strategy, because they had, the ads teed up to run on BET and so forth. And in their case, they made the right decision. They switched the ads. But it's interesting how, with social especially, if you leverage social, it's amazing how much insight you can glean if you kind of filter out, some of the noise, and how immediate that reaction can be.
So what's the learning there when you switch the creative, though? Like, in my mind, I'm saying what we thought was going to be appropriate for one audience, just when we were about to spend the dollars, switch it to the other? I mean, what's the learning that you can apply it to, say, that...
In this particular case, the message was a little different. It was more of a patriotic message in the Hispanic spot, and I think the lesson there was just, audiences are colorblind today. They kind of don't need to necessarily identify with the people if they identify with the message, and they felt that that universal message resonated more. So regardless of which ad they had teed up to run in, across the households that were going to be targeting among African American households, they felt, let's go with the patriotic message. And it's just that the agency that created the spot, I mean, their business is to develop and craft kind of multicultural messages around, a single theme. So for them, it was insightful because it kind of flew in the face of their assumption on which ad was going to resonate most. Certainly in the focus groups they did.
Which is that message and theme is more important than color.
Right.
For that learning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go to the gentleman in the back, and then we'll go to you. And please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Eric Bibitzer. I have a web series called The News Rip, and it's a comedy where I have one headline and one punchline. And so I was, to go back to this Dove ad you asked about in your cousin, I noticed another mention about the controversial Pepsi commercial that sort of backfired on them. It was sort of heroic Pepsi saves the day, and it really backfired on them. To the extent that like a bad piece of news about a product really generates bad publicity, or it's sort of like, again, there really is no bad publicity, that in terms of a brand, it just keeps it in the back of everybody's mind still. And so like even, when a blogger takes up a piece of bad news, like Cinnabon has a recall or something like that, then still it just makes people think, oh, Cinnabon, I'd like a Cinnabon.
So I guess the question comes down, is there such a thing as bad publicity?
Yes.
I'm going to say yes as well.
I mean, we're still talking about Pepsi. And,
And we're and let's not forget about Jared and Subway.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And Chipotle.
Right. But that sounded like an inside job, I'll be honest.
I mean, there are varying degrees, sure. I mean, I think LeVar Ball is both an idiot and a genius. The thing that he's done for his family and the Big Baller brand is incredible. And some would consider that bad press, but it's not damaging. He is just outlandish in saying, I can beat Michael Jordan one-on-one. And that keeps him in the news cycle. And then when he starts to get out, he challenges Shaquille O'Neal and his son to 2-on-2. And then when that starts to get out of the news cycle, he comes up with something else crazy. And so I would say it varies, but there certainly is bad press.
So before we go to the next question, I want to ask all of you, but especially Ty here, when you're dealing with athletes and performers, years back, and not that many years back, some of the most successful ones tried to keep their political views, social views out of public eye because they wanted to be attractive to everybody. That's been changed. Michael Jordan was a great example of that. Well, compare Michael Jordan to LeBron James. And how does that impact their marketability? And what you can do to, what type of brand will be associated with them? How do those decisions sort of?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times it depends on the brand. When the campaign comes through, they'll have that. They'll try to protect themselves as much as possible. So they'll have that written into, like, listen, you need to vet talent that isn't overly political or overly into something, or maybe they're very into PETA or other groups like that are controversial. So that's all kind of written in when we're putting these deals together, and that gives us some guiding points too of who we're looking for, who we think would be a good fit for it. Also, you know, is that, if you put an ad in their feed, is that going to stick out like a sore thumb too? If you've been talking about all this political stuff, all of a sudden there's an ad, obviously that's not going to feel right either. Obviously, you know, celebrities are very hyper aware of their brands. Some of them don't focus as much on the brand deals. They don't care if it boxes them out of things. This is their platform to speak, and that's their thing. Some brands may be into that too. They want that unfiltered, you know, part of it. And then the other ones that are super aware of it, you'll have a very sometimes sterile feed where it's not that much personality. There's some content, maybe it's not very behind the scenes either, and maybe some brands just want that just for the name and just to be associated with that person and know they're going to get, you know, just right down the line aligning with that person.
But you as a marketer these days are privy to a fair amount of data and insight and general street knowledge of, because everything is above board these days. There's very few characters out there that keep themselves behind the veil of no social media, no. So you're privy to this stuff. And so if you're a marketer, you're an agency, you know what your talent has. There are outliers, obviously, to that. And I think Michael, what's his face from Seinfeld, was a complete outlier. Like, one would have not thought.
Michael Richards.
Richards. That was sort of an outlier. Didn't seem like that would happen, and it did. But generally speaking, you as a marketer, you as a brand, you as an agency, if you're spending your money, you best be spending it and doing your own research and working with guys like these to make sure that you're double checking, making sure, because it's there for you to slice and dice.
Yeah, the biggest mistake you can make in branded entertainment is try to create something for a celebrity or a brand that feels inauthentic. I think part of the reason why our Deadpool campaign worked so well is because all of the content that we created for Ryan felt like Ryan's voice. It looked at how he already talked, the things he already posted, the things he was already interested in, and really Deadpool and Ryan, his persona, feel almost synonymous. But all of the content felt like an extension of him, and because it rang true and was authentic for fans, they were more receptive to it instead of it feeling that it was like phoned in or canned or simply to shell a movie out.
And that's tougher to do with more established artists like that too, because you do think, you know, it's going to stick out. And when talking with brands too, when they're trying to figure out if they want that, you know, that A-lister that everybody knows, or maybe just a YouTuber that has a great audience, that has, you know, a very good following, you need to be open as a brand, I think, more as well to those influencers that from day to day will change their mind about products. That's what makes them authentic. Their fans are used to them saying, oh, I like Coke. Oh, I also like this new Pepsi product. It has nothing to do with those brands going against each other. It's their authentic self saying, I'm like you. I wear different brands all the time that maybe compete or maybe don't. So tapping into that is also, I think, important for brands to realize.
Will, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just, I think it goes back to finding partners that share the passion for the brand. You know, when we look at, and what I talked about earlier about building a campaign approach for a brand, it's about finding the storytellers that have an equal amount of passion and interest in the brand as the brand does in the content. And I think that translates on screen, on social, on digital. When you have a marriage that is equally beneficial and passionate, because like we all said, in this day and age and with social media, the audience is very savvy and they'll voice their opinions immediately, and brands know that. So you have to find a marriage that makes sense on both sides and that have equal levels of passion on both sides.
Yeah, we often do an exercise internally where we look at, like, a Venn diagram approach. What are the things that the brand cares about and the audience cares about that's not the brand? And then how do we create content around that sweet spot?
Right. I'll go back to the audience now. This gentleman here. Can you please identify yourself first? So the question was concerning when brands are going out and doing these campaigns on an ongoing campaign, do they look at it more broadly, you know, in terms of the U.S. market, or just regionally within the U.S. market, or in fact different foreign markets that they might be looking to enter, and will they focus then on that region or that different country versus
my last job before this was I was head of content for Omnicom Media Group across Asia Pacific. So you talk about Japan and certainly the other markets in that space. Branded content is becoming enormous everywhere. It is huge in countries like China, India, Indonesia, and for a few reasons. One is that a lot of the developing countries, entertainment is such a powerful way in households that may not have a television, households that may never have a desktop computer, but people have mobile phones. And so branded content is being done in some really fascinating ways in those different markets. In India, for example, a lot of people don't have smartphones. The vast majority still have the old non-smartphones. And so companies are doing what they call callback. And you will dial a number, it rings. It's what we used to do when we were teenagers. You know, you'd dial a number, it would ring twice, and that would tell Dad that you were ready to be picked up. So you dial a number, and it calls you back with content, with jokes, with Bollywood stars reading astrology messages out, or whatever it might be. But I think the interesting thing is that different markets use branded entertainment in different ways depending on the audience, and that's exactly what it's all about, is what does the audience in this market demand. In China, you can get away with much, much more explicit branded content that would just never fly here. So the movies like Transformers have special cuts that only screen in China and have very, very explicit branded messages where the character will be holding up a carton of milk halfway through it. That's a popular brand in that market, and it works really well for those markets in a way that it wouldn't necessarily in a market like America or Australia. So I think that's the beauty of branded entertainment and brands using entertainment, is that it can be very aligned to the specific audiences and very different.
Other questions? We'll come back to this row, but we're going to go to that young lady first.
I'm Ellen Campbell with Nomad's IT Marketing for Media and Entertainment Technology. And I wondered about VR and how many of you are going into that space. I can imagine the opportunities are huge across the board.
So the question is, what's going on in terms of the opportunities in branded marketing for VR, and I'm going to extend that to also AR as well. And that's virtual reality and augmented reality.
So from our perspective at Jam City, we're making casual games, puzzle games, story-driven games. The thought process today is that we understand the game mechanics and the game audience, and we are double down today with what we know. Moving in the future, obviously content is going to be taken to this whole new form that we're calling VR, AR, whatever it is. But what I will say, what was most interesting over the last few years is that Pokemon Go, through Niantic, the game, did more for VR and AR, in my opinion, than any Google Glass, Google Cardboard, Samsung Gear, the other device that put the helmet on, the hand things, Oculus. That's a whole other machine. And why is because I just have my phone. That's all I need. And that's why, and I also don't think mass consumers totally get the difference between VR and AR. It's this blurred thing. They think it's going to be something different, and different and good. But generally speaking, I think the next step for all this stuff is probably seeing a lot of these VR experiences happening at Westfield, at the Grove, and you're going to double down and see those experiences happening there. And then it's going to make it a little easier for me to buy that $5,000 rig for my house, because now I'm sitting by myself in front of something instead of a giant movie screening room that maybe somebody might have. So I think it's going to start with that, and you've already seen that with a lot of the theme parks, Magic Mountain, Universal, where they have these really interactive experiences. So it's only ahead. There's only going to be some really killer innovation happening. And I think it happens with great stories. Oftentimes it's games, as well as travel, and things of that nature.
I'm going to give an example of what I saw was a non-killer use of AR. I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm a huge Washington Nationals fan, season ticket holder from day one. They're in, at least through today, they're still in the National League Divisional Series. I went to the first game on Friday night, and they gave out, and Coca-Cola sponsored it, squares that are in red with a white K on it, and K means strikeout, and Steven Strasburg was pitching, so the idea is that every time there's a strikeout, you raise it. But they also had an augmented reality segment of it, and they told you on the back to open up the MLB Ballpark app, click on augmented reality, scan the card, which I did, and I thought, well, this is going to be really cool. I wonder what they're going to do. And maybe I did something wrong, but all I saw was just a little, I wouldn't say cheesy, but nothing exciting, video image of a couple of Coke bottles clicking, and that was it. And it had no association to the game or anything else, and I was just very confused by that. But maybe you have better experiences or things that are going on beyond, what Josh had to say in that area too?
I think also it's like with everything. Any of these new opportunities that come our way, as marketers, we really have to think about, why are we doing this? The first VR experience you have, you can put the headset on, you can be in a boardroom, and it's fascinating because it's the first time. The second, it better bloody well be good. You can't just get into something because you think this is the new sexy marketing thing of the day. That you have to understand, why are you using it and what is the purpose for the audience? Because if you're not solving a problem for me, and VR and AR can solve fantastic problems, how to decorate your house, will this car suit me, whatever it might be, but you need to use it for that purpose, and you need to stay away from the self-indulgence of doing something just because you can and it's new.
Okay, these two gentlemen, we're going to try to get to you, but we only have like 5 minutes, so we're going to start with you.
My name is Brian Dick. This is head marketing at Samsung for the Media Solutions Division, and prior to that, the ad agency in New York. The question I have, I'm directed for Ms. Ruiz. One of the narratives over the last few years in the agency landscape has been that a lot of the services have been commoditized by media buying. And clients and brands are asking, requiring their agencies to do more marketing, sensibility, at a very high level. I'm curious how you've seen that changes your agency over the last year or two.
So the question is, and I may mess it up, but the question really concerns how brands are trying to get more of a marketing sensibility into how campaigns are put together and integration and what have you. And it's for Anathea, but if others could answer too, but quickly since we only have a few minutes.
I mean, from our perspective, you couldn't be more right. And I think all of the big holding companies are investing in divisions and specialisms that sit outside what we would call traditional media planning and buying, whether that's social, whether that's programmatic, whether it's content. And there's a good reason for that. I always say that we haven't gone into the water bottle distribution business because that's not what our clients need. But our clients do need to have a centralised group thinking about all of the different ways they need to reach their audiences, whatever the channel may be. So that, I always describe the media agency's role as being the almost like the generalists in the room. Certainly the media agency leadership is that we need to be able to go and work with our clients and really listen to what their challenges are and work out the best solution and pull that solution from wherever it might be. Because it's not just media planning and buying anymore, it's not just the paid spaces. So we do need to bring in media resource into the agency that has a very different background. I don't have a media agency background. I couldn't plan a TV campaign if you put a gun to my head. I'd try very hard if you did, but I don't have that skill set. That's not what my clients need. We need me to be able to identify people who can solve for that problem, but also to think about all the other challenges that our clients are facing. So it's a much broader skill set that leads the accounts, and it's a much deeper skill set that brings all of those specialisms to bear.
Now, this gentleman over here.
My name is David Watts, aka Mr. Chairman of Utrecht TV and Medicare. Last Sunday on 60 Minutes, they had a very excitable gentleman who ran a Trump campaign. He showed how he used the social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, and Google, to actually come into his place. He bypassed buying marketers and digital specialists and had them directly show how he could put $94 million to through their platforms and influence elections. He basically claimed he won the election and got Trump elected by just using digital platforms and using the teams of digital companies. Do you think there'll be a paradigm shift coming up in the next year, 6 months, where they don't need marketers, who people just figure out they can just bring in the Facebooks and Twitters and Google and they just run their campaigns through them?
So let me, I've got to repeat the question first. It really is the question really about in social media with Facebook and what they did from 60 Minutes in terms of explaining how they help advise, and they would have done it for Clinton as well, the campaign in terms of how to use their advertising vehicles to work directly without having to go through a middle person.
Yeah, I'll try to answer it quickly. I mean, the long and the short of it is he's not a normal person. He is a marketing company. Anytime you have $94 million to spend, which is the number you threw out, of course Facebook will come to your living room and Snapchat will. The same way if I had $94 million at my agency to spend, Facebook would come to my office, Snapchat would come to my office. And so I don't think that is it's not apples to apples by any means. There are plenty of like best practices and tools, but at the end of the day, most of those platforms are trying to sell ad inventory, and if you are wielding dollars like that, of course you can get their attention.
And they have self-serve platforms specifically built to allow people, maybe not at the 94 million level, but clearly at the millions level.
Yeah.
So you can self-serve, do it on your own, and not feel like you need a layer of an agency to guide you along, because I can actually run those campaigns and analyze those campaigns on my own.
Yep.
And I'm just me.
So you don't have any concerns in the agency space of somehow being eliminated?
No, there's a level of expertise I think that comes with it, and someone can do it on their own for sure if they're savvy enough, and that person either
is now a media agency.
Yeah, exactly. Is their own media agency.
And as you said, with $94 million in your pocket, you get a little more attention, and perhaps you'll have only the $80 million clients.
But I think it's important too. I mean, it's the plumbing on the activation. It's how you activate against an audience. What was interesting about the piece was how sophisticated they were about the target audience and the messages that would work and how they could customize those messages. So, and that requires a lot of work, whether it's from an agency or whether it's from his own consulting shop. To me, the magic was really that. How he activated against it was interesting, but to me, that's, over time, it's really just programmatic. It's just moving. But what it does is it places more emphasis on understanding with real granular detail your audiences and the right messages, and then carrying out that. And in this case, to me, it was just kind of a programmatic play where they had some in-house people working on it, but the real mastery was message testing and really getting a good sense of what issues are going to influence which types of voters.
Yeah, that's 100% right. You can spend $94 million really badly.
Right.
Yeah, right.
You can.
One last question over here from this young lady. Oh, so this is going to be a softball.
There's an Ipsos study that cited that 86% of marketers felt that their audience was moving towards non-ad supported platforms. But with data not being shared, is data really truly the one obstacle that's holding back advertisers and partners going to that space?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen is that TV consumption, ad-supported TV, is growing. It's just that more of it's moving in non-measured modes. And there was a couple of examples of large CPG companies that shifted significant amount of their TV money to digital a few years ago. And even though they couldn't measure it at a household level, sales declined. So now they're moving it back. So I think, and after measuring hundreds of campaigns, I can tell you, when used properly, I mean, it really can lift, TV can lift, across all medium, like it drives search, it drives digital, but it's really understanding how to use it, not whether or not to use it. And I think that's what, we've been talking a lot about that. And the Achilles heel, is, at least for TV, has been that there hasn't been a vast amount of data that you can act on. It's just ratings. It's almost like box office receipts for a movie, pass, fail, versus something much more granular about the types of audiences that are engaging, and then what's the best media mix to really reach them. I think solving TV is the one piece, but then stitching together the cross-platform consumption is the other that's really important, especially for a lot of the work being done here, you know, investing beyond just spots and into real, you know, long-form programming, to me that, you know, will be over time, you know, one of the most important vehicles for advertisers, given the fact that, you know, ad tolerance is starting to change.
I'd also add that marketers are humans too, and so 86% of marketers say something. I don't deny that they feel that way, but I think they are also subject to reading the same headlines that everyone else is reading. TV's dead, this is the only way, Facebook's the only place you can invest your money. So I think that that's why sometimes we get these sorts of, you know, let's put everything in VR, because I'm reading so much about VR, it must be the new sexy thing. If TV's dead, am I doing something wrong? So I think that marketers need to follow the data more and sort of almost stay the course a little bit. So studies aren't always 100% accurate.
So Anathea, you have the last word on that panel, on this panel, because we have exceeded our time, but I hope you've enjoyed it. I want to please join me in you know, thanking the panel for all of their insights today. And I wish you have a wonderful time for the rest of today and tomorrow at Digital Hollywood.